Now usually when they will give you three types of graph, one is called displacement time, or they will give you a velocity time, or they give you acceleration time graph. But your job is you need to convert. That means if let's say they give you like displacement time, draw the velocity time, or from velocity time draw the displacement time, or from velocity time draw the acceleration time graph, or from velocity time graph draw the displacement time graph. So that means you need to work forwards and backwards lah. But how you want to convert, right, is by using the concept of gradient and values. Now what do you mean by gradient and values? Now remember the three formulas that we're going to, no, two formulas that we're going to use. One is V is equals to S divided by T, the other one is A is equals to V over T, right now. Now it means that if you are using this relationship, the S divided by T means the gradient of this graph. That means the gradient of the ST graph will give you the value of the VT graph. And if you look at this relationship, the gradient of the VT graph will give you the value of the AT graph. So every time you need to convert from here to here to here, or here to here to here, you just have to look at gradient and values. So I'm going to teach you how to look at gradient and values first. Now, let's do the basic. When you describe gradient and values, I want you to describe them in terms of like 0, constant and positive, constant and negative, more and more positive, more and more negative, less and less positive, less and less negative. Easy to remember now. Because 0, then it's constant, positive, constant, negative. More and more positive, more and more negative. Less and less positive, less and less negative. You understand now? Now, example, let's look at this graph. Okay, now, if we want to look at gradient, we need to look at the slope. So, when I ask you to describe the gradient, I want you to imagine the slope. That means imagine you're climbing this hill. As you're climbing this hill, right, is it pointing up or down? So any any line that points up is a positive gradient. Any line that points down is a negative gradient. Do you understand? Now, then you compare, let's look at the gradient. Is it a straight line or not? If it's a straight line like this, then we say the gradient is constant. But if it's a curve, your gradient is not constant, right? Like in this case here, it is pointing up, so it's positive, but it's not a straight line, so it's not constant and positive. Do you understand? So it's either more and more positive or less and less positive. So how do I know? You need to imagine as you're climbing up this slope, is it getting steeper or less steep? Less steep or steeper? Less steep. If you cannot imagine, you draw tangent. Is it steeper or less steep? Less steep. So you will describe the gradient as less and less positive. Do you understand? So if you are talking about gradient, we look at the slope. Now if I ask you to describe the values, then what do you look at? You look at the y-axis value. Like this. So that means as you are moving along the graph, your y-axis values, are all these positive or negative values? Positive. Are they getting more positive or less positive? More positive or less positive? Imagine you assign values 1, 2, 3, 4. It's more and more positive. So for this case, we will call the value more and more positive. Okay, another example. Okay, let's look at this. Is the line pointing down or up? So we call the gradient negative, right now. But is it a straight line? No, so it's not constant and negative. So imagine as you're climbing down the hill here, is it getting steeper for you or less steep? Easier to climb down or harder? Harder, because it depends on what's your definition of easier or harder lah. Easier as in you roll down faster lah. But it's hard to balance yourself, right? So, but if you look at the tangent, is it getting steeper or less steep? So we will call the gradient more and more negative. Do you understand? But if you're looking at values, then we must look at the y-axis value. As you move from here to here, all these y-axis values are positive or negative? Just tell me positive or negative only. Okay, but are they getting more positive or less positive? So the value is less and less positive. Do you understand now? Okay, third one. After this, you'll be expert already. If we move from here to here, let's look at the gradient. Gradient don't care about value, don't care about the y-axis. Just look at the slope. Is it pointing up or down? So it is positive or negative gradient? Positive gradient, right or not? Is it getting steeper or less steep? Steeper. If you always cannot imagine, draw tangent. So it's getting steeper, so you will describe the gradient as more and more positive. Agree not? Then when you describe the values, you look at the y-axis. As you move from here to here, are all these values positive or negative? Positive or negative? Negative. Are all these less and less negative or more and more negative? So the value is less and less negative. Okay, now the last one, if you move down from here to here, is it a straight line or a curve? Okay, now is it pointing down or up? So how will you describe the gradient? Constant and negative. But when you look at the value, you must assign the y-axis value like this. So when you move from here to here, are these values, how do you describe them? More and more negative. You understand? Okay? Now I practice changing ones. For example, let's say I want to change. Let's say I'm given this graph, VT graph. I want to change to ST and also AT. So how do I change from here to here to here, and here to here? Now what is the relationship between V and S? What is the formula? V is equals to S divided by T. So in other words, the value of my V is equal to the gradient of my ST graph. Do you agree now? So since I'm given this graph, I want to change to here. So I need to look at what? According to my formula, I must look at value or gradient. This value. Isn't it value? Just V by itself? So you look at value. So can you describe the value for me? From here to here, describe the value. More and more positive. If I want to convert to ST graph, I need to change to gradient. So since the value you told me is more and more positive, so the gradient of ST graph must also be more and more positive. So how do you draw a more and more positive gradient? First, it must point up, agree? Then it must get steeper. That's why we draw pointing up and steeper. Do you understand? If we want to change from VT graph to AT graph, then we write down the formula. What's the relationship between VT and AT? A is equals to V divided by T. So therefore, since we are given the VT graph, so according to my formula, which is this side, is gradient or value? Gradient. So I must look at the gradient here and change to become the value here. Do you understand? So can you describe the gradient here? Constant and positive. So therefore, the value of A will also be constant and positive. So I'm talking about a value, not gradient, so I must draw a horizontal line. Then my value will be constant and positive. So very importantly, do not mix up gradient and value. Gradient, you look at slope. Value, you look at y-axis. Do you understand?